I'm reading from All the Women of the Bible, and I'm reading the story Delilah and the Deadly Lure. This is part 3. So in part 2, at the end of part 2, Delilah had just figured out another possible way to trick Samson into telling her the source of his strength. So let's get into it. The weaving did catch Samson's attention, but oddly, he laughed heartily at it, then sighed, his mouth twisting in a fleeting bitterness she had not seen in him before. Nothing, nothing, he answered when she asked concerned what was wrong. He studied her design. Your lion will do very well, he said at last, provided you give him really sharp teeth and claws, and keep his head up, defiant and proud. Make sure the eyes are open and that he's glaring at his tormentors. They may take his body, but they must never take his spirit. No, that would be wrong. She understood, and with a few quick charcoal lines caught the spirit he was talking about. He was delighted. Do that, and you'll have the best lion in the world, he boomed. Later in their lovemaking, he had said with an odd smile, answering her usual tease. Weaving is dangerous, love. Catch my 7 locks of hair in the web of your weaving, and you'll reduce me to ordinary strength. I'll just be like any poor soul in your nets. Nonsense, she had returned. If anyone is in the nets, I am. I'll never escape you, beloved, and I certainly don't want to. Her heart pounded. She had had the answer she had sought. She knew she did. And that failed too. The 7 locks of hair she had so carefully woven into the web, into the lion, in fact, dogging the peg down as tightly as it would go, had simply melted out of the weaving the moment her screams roused him from his sleep in her arms, and he had roared in his pursuit of the unfortunate soldiers of the chiefs. That's it, their spokesman declared the day after her 3rd failure. You're useless. We'll get him some other way. Kiss your shekels goodbye, mistress. He gazed stonily at her, and when he left, he shut her door with an exaggerated care more terrifying than a slam. Galvanized, Delilah determined she would break Samson and learn his secret. Her determination rose, not just because her own life was at stake, nor because she wanted the 1,100 shekels. Now what she had feared was that her own powers had vanished in the fires of their passionate and delightful couplings. And that would be a real disaster, she thought. So she began, skillfully and with no hint of annoyance, nor indeed of anything but besotted adoration, to nag him, declaring each time they met that he could not possibly love her and would withhold the insignificant truth she had asked of him. I'm no Philistine, she would laugh, and you are most certainly, beloved, not my enemy. He would answer, devouring her, but would give her no further reply. Days later, yielding to her persistence as much as to his enchantment of her, with now at its height, he gave in. It's not much of a secret, he told her, smiling, his index finger wiggling the very tip of her nose as she giggled. It's the hair. I was consecrated a Nazarite by my mother when I was conceived. Nazarite? She asked, puzzled. What's that? He looked at her startled, then nodded. Right. You've no way of knowing that. Basically, it means no wine or spirits, no food our law calls unclean, and no haircuts. The consecration is to the Lord God, and those are its signs. So you've never had a haircut? Delilah was intrigued. She had wondered at the luxuriousness of his hair, as thick and shining as her own. And if I do, he added quite matter-of-factly, that would be the end of my strength. Why? She asked, for the moment forgetting that this, at last, was the secret he had guarded so well. Because the consecration wasn't my mother's idea, but the Lord God's. And the strength I have is being given me for his purposes. If I break that consecration, it means I'm turning from him, and his strength will leave me. Very simple. Now, and he smiled in that particular way that Delilah had come to recognize with a shiver of delight as prelude to passion. Yes, beloved, she whispered. Afterwards, she had sent word to the chiefs on the chance that their offer would still be open. She rather hoped it was not, for more and more she was coming to regret her involvement with them and to see her prying as a kind of betrayal. But if the 1,100 shekels were still on offer, it seemed a shame to let them go away. If Samson were going to be destroyed anyway, he'd want me to have that much, she told herself, firmly if illogically. And anyway, they may have really given up on me and not do anything about my information. They had not given up on her. A band of soldiers, one equipped with a shining, sharp barber's razor, disposed themselves in their usual hiding places in her chamber. They'd brought chains with them, and not one of them had a sack that clinked significantly, but no one mentioned either. Delilah found loving Samson that day especially sweet, and tinged with bitter sorrow as well. Her lion was in excellent spirits, suspecting nothing, and he took them to heights beyond any they had scaled before, laughing in his joy. She joined him in the laughter, though hers had a touch of tears, and when at last they returned to earth and he fell asleep, trustingly in her arms, she wanted nothing so much as to have her observers and allies vanish into smoke. They had not. At her tentative gesture, the man with the razor emerged, carrying a basin of water, soap, and a towel. Expertly, he shaved off the 7 locks of hair, and as each one fell into the towel, Delilah felt her heart sink a little further. Finally, the barber nodded to her, scooped up the towel full of Samson's hair, dropped the razor into his basin, rose and slipped back, leaving the field of action clear for his fellow soldiers. Delilah cleared her throat and around the lump of unshed tears called, "Samson! Samson! Wake up! The Philistines have broken in!" At once he rose, meeting the emerging soldiers as he had before, but when he called upon his strength, he had none. His face white with shock, he raised both hands to his head and felt his shaved scalp. His howl of misery was met by the ferocity of the soldiers, no longer afraid of this enemy. They blinded him as he stood there, and his scream tore at Delilah's heart. Horrified at their cruelty, she made a gesture as if to stop them, but dropped her hand to her side helpless. They loaded their blinded enemy with bronze chains, and as they huddled him out of their room, the chief, who had first contacted her, dropped the clinking sack on her bed with a contemptuous, "Your wage, mistress." A year later, Delilah learned the rest. They had taken him directly from her room to Gaza and set him to turning the mill there. Then, several months later, at a festival of Dagon, they had him brought in the temple to entertain him with feats of strength. His hair had grown back, but his superhuman strength had not returned with it, though his commitment to the Lord God was stronger than it had ever been. He had asked the boy who led him around to bring him to the central pillars, the ones supporting the building, and to fix his chains to the ring there. The boy did so, and Samson, uttering his prayer to the Lord God for a final return of the strength he had given him to use against the Philistines, had pulled the building down and killed the thousands inside it, dying with them. Hearing the news, Delilah felt her heart lift. "Good for you, my lion," she thought. "You've beaten them all. You've won." She swallowed the lump in her throat, closed her eyes briefly, then looked at her companion. "More wine, husband?" she smiled. I hope you've enjoyed this story time from Delilah. Tomorrow we'll be reading Dinah and the Impetuous Brothers. And I hope you'll join me later for your dose of comfort from Food Reviews. And as ever and as always, I am so glad you exist. I am proud of you, and I love you. And I hope you never ever forget that somebody smiled today because of you. Because you are enough, you matter, and you are perfect. You always have been, and you always will be, period.